Well, after a month away for the summer break, Formula One returns for the back end of the season. 10 Grand Prix to go to round out 2024. And it kicks back off at round 15 at Zandvoort for the Dutch Grand Prix, a tight and technical circuit, as we know, which features those unique banks as well. Before we get to that, though, let's have a quick look at the standings. The championship looks like this. Well, as we know, it's Max Verstappen that leads the championship. He's 78 points ahead of the chasing pack and Lando Norris in second. Then it's Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton on 150 points down in sixth. Sergio Perez keeping his job on 131. Russell, Alonso and Stroll round out the top 10. All the way down to the bottom, though, 3 drivers yet to score: Zhou Guanyu, Logan Sargent and Valtteri Bottas. Looking at the constructors, and it's Red Bull that lead the way, but the gap is closing, just 42 points ahead of McLaren with a 10 Grand Prix to go. Ferrari next up, 345 points. Then it's Mercedes, Aston Martin, RB, Haas, Alpine and Williams down there on 4 points. And still yet to score, it's Sauber. Well, joining me to discuss all the news we missed over the summer break and take a look at the Grand Prix itself, I'm delighted to have Stuart Codling, and over there at his home Grand Prix, we have Ronald Vording. Good to have you both. First of all, Codders, it's the first time you've joined me on this platform. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Probably the first time I've joined you on this platform because I've been limping from a forest after spraining my ankle on the way back from the local music festival. So that's my little eventful story. Last time it was spiders nesting in my motorcycle exhaust.
Cue the violins. Ronald, what about you? How are you doing?
Yeah, all good. I feel like I'm doing more English videos during the summer break than I'm doing Dutch ones. So I don't know if that's a good sign or not. But no, it's always good fun. And I mean, we're all happy to get back to it again, I think. And especially for me, heading into the home race, it's always special. I think if you would have told a random guy on the street 10 years ago that F1 would come back to Zandvoort, they would not have believed you. But of course, we all know that a certain Dutch guy changed the landscape a little bit. So here we are. I'm not sure how long it will last for the future, but that's something we can talk about later.
I'm sure we shall. By the way, I've been doing all the Dutch content recently. That's why you've been doing all the English stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just another weird quirk of fate. So, gents, before we start talking about Zandvoort then, as Codders looks completely perplexed by that.
Is this what we call passing the Dutchie?
Oh, dear. Let's just pass the Dutchie and get on with it, please, Codders. On the left-hand side, yeah? Right, now then, let's go, shall we, to some news that's happened in the summer break then. We'll start with Formula One owners Liberty Media. They're facing an investigation, aren't they, from the US Department of Justice over their exclusion of Andretti Global entering Formula One. Now, the Liberty CEO, Greg Maffei, has said that F1 will cooperate with the investigation, which is good of him. But what do you reckon? Should Formula One be fearful over their defiance of there being an 11th team? What do we reckon, Codders?
Well, the invisible bit of that sentence from Greg was, for now, because this is certainly an escalation of the threat level from the Department of Justice. It's been in the ether for a while. There was talk at the beginning of the year. Andretti raised a complaint when the door was shut on them. A few politicians in the States sort of chanted a little bit. But the general feeling was it's just people who are chums of Andretti making a bit of a noise. Nothing will come of it. But now actually here we are with the Department of Justice investigation. And it's getting a little bit more serious. It's not gone to court yet. But in any free market, there's always this tension between this sort of drive, and because we live in a capitalist society, there's the drive for the markets to be unfettered, but then, as free market advocate Adam Smith himself pointed out, when you get a bunch of people who are involved in an industry together, work will naturally turn to how they can manipulate the market to their own ends. So all countries across the world have various legislation that deals with monopolies and also cartels that aren't necessarily monopolies, but it's competing companies who set aside their competition to screw the customer over. And America has a grand tradition of taking on monopolies. I think over 100 years ago, the President, William Howard Taft, took 75 companies through the courts to break up monopolies. So there is a tradition there. Recently, it's been the Department of Justice versus the tech companies. So I think the most landmark win they had in the past sort of quarter century was against Microsoft. Microsoft was trying to make Internet Explorer. This is making me feel very old talking about Microsoft Internet Explorer, the standard browser, and they had their sort of legs cut off below the knees. At the moment, Google and Apple also facing antitrust lawsuits. So that's now kind of on its way through the courts. We're not at that stage yet, but the Department of Justice have made it very, very clear that they will aggressively pursue monopolies and cartels. And they've had quite a lot of success over the past few years. Where they've had losses, it's typically not been in these scenarios of companies abusing their position to target end consumers. Most of the stuff they've actually lost has been in labour terms. So it's companies banding together to sort of say have no poach clauses to drive wages down. So it'd be very interesting to see if they decide they've got a case here.
We have to keep our eyes on that one. I'm sure you'll be across it, Codders, as you always are. Let's talk about another story that's been popping up more recent times, and that is this public negotiation between the F1 CEO, Stefano Domenicali, easy for me to say, and the Rwanda Development Board, potentially bringing a Grand Prix to this East African country. Now, it's highly possible, isn't it, that we're going to get a Grand Prix in Africa? It would be good to go back to Africa. It seems strange they haven't been there for quite some time. What is it you think about this, the likelihood? And Ronald, from your point of view, what are the rumours around the Dutch Grand Prix? Because there are rumours circulating that it's going to be alternated between Zandvoort and Spa year on year.
Yeah, I think it's all a bit connected. I mean, it's the overall picture of the whole calendar, and it's quite clear that F1 has a couple of markets in which it still wants to grow and sees potential to expand even further. Asia is clearly one of them. Africa is another one where they want to come back, as you pointed out. I think for the US, they are quite okay for the moment, having 3 races in the US. They have Montreal also in North America, so I think that's okay for now. But they are looking at Asia, they're looking at Africa. First of all, we had the talks about Kialami, of course, didn't materialize so far. Now the talks about Rwanda, they had a meeting at the Monaco Grand Prix, and there's definitely a push, at least to look at the options together, and you can see that by the FIA hosting other events there. If you look at the General Assembly and also at the prize giving at the end of the year, that will all be in Rwanda, so it tells you something. And if it works out, if Africa works out, if more races in Asia work out, then it's directly connected to the races in Europe, because if you don't want to go to 35 or 40 races a year, it can only come at the expense of one continent, and that is Europe. So then automatically you start looking at Imola, at 2 races in Italy, for example, but also at Zandvoort and Spa. I think there was some media coverage recently, especially in the Netherlands, that it could already be a done deal, like alternating Spa and Zandvoort. Then I texted some people from the Zandvoort organization, and they replied, I do not recognize a single word from that story. So I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that Formula 1 management definitely is looking at that option, that maybe Formula 1 management definitely wants Spa and Zandvoort to alternate on the long term. But then Zandvoort itself, the Dutch Grand Prix, has to get its business case like financially stable for the long term. And we shouldn't forget that Zandvoort is one of few races, I think together with Silverstone, that is not getting financial support from the government. And then you are competing against races in the Middle East. You are competing against cities like Vegas and Miami. So it's a tricky landscape for Zandvoort. And that means that everything has to be covered by sponsors and by ticket sales. And then it's quite interesting that this is actually the first year since the race came back in 2021 that in this week, so the week before the race, there are still tickets available. And that's a bit weird, because the on-track action in Formula 1 now is better than 2022, it's better than 2023. So maybe it tells you that the initial hype of, I really need to be there, that the initial hype is maybe a little bit gone. And I think that's why there has been no announcement so far, that the Dutch Grand Prix first wants to see how it evolves, how like the ticket demand for 2025 will be if they open the ticket sales this week. And afterwards, maybe they can still make the deal that F1 probably wants them to make, which is alternating between Spa and Zandvoort.
Could it be? Could it be that the Dutch fans aren't quite so loving the fact that Max isn't definitely going to win, and so they might be staying away for that? I don't require an answer on that, Ronald. I'm just trying to, go fishing there for a second. But Codders, what are your thoughts then on Codders? What are your thoughts on Zandvoort and Spa alternating, and on having a Grand Prix back in Africa, because it's a massive continent for Formula One not to go to?
Yeah, I think Ronald's point was really interesting there about whether Formula One is now a must. It's quite interesting. You think back in the 1970s, before the era of lots of races being televised, the race promoters didn't actually want the races to be put on TV because they thought that people wouldn't buy tickets if they could sit at home and watch it in the comfort there. So that, you would think, had been disproved, but over the past sort of 30, 40 years, that actually, people want to watch F1 on TV. They'll also pay to watch a race. Declining ticket sales, not just at Zandvoort, also Silverstone wasn't a sellout this year. When it's happening to races that were previously sellouts, you do have to start looking at possible reasons for it. Is it fatigue with one person winning all the time? You've got to say, this year, like Ronald says, no, this has been the most varied season in terms of individual winners for over a decade. Is it oversaturation of races? Are there too many races on the calendar? That's actually quite an interesting one that's worth discussing. Difficult to find any data about it, though. So, yeah, we have to ask ourselves, are there too many races? Are people thinking, well, I've got other things to do on those 52 weekends a year. I don't really want to be sitting on my sofa watching TV especially if it's one of the 3 days of the British summer. So that's interesting. Will Africa come back? Also open to question. Kyalami, they've built housing nearby, so people. I'd never understand why people buy a house near a race circuit or an airport or something and then moan about planes or cars or something. It's not like they've just built it yesterday, but this is a ridiculous digression. Anyway, Kyalami's possible. There doesn't seem to be the will. Rwanda's an interesting case. Obviously flush with cash, the government at the moment, after being paid a lot of money by the former British government to send people there and not having a single plane land. So what are they going to do with the cash? Why not build a circuit? Do something good with it, I say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Rwanda, if you're a Brit, Rwanda, it seems to be a topic that pops up a lot now, but it would be interesting, and I'm all for it. I think, it's a huge continent. Formula One should probably visit as many corners of the earth as it can, but I don't want 30 Grand Prix a year. I'm happy with 20, in all honesty. 24 is probably 4 too many in my mind, but let's just move that one on from that discussion for another day. Another news story came out then, and this is another senior management departure at Red Bull. This time, after 18 years as sporting director, Jonathan Wheatley is leaving. He's going to go to Audi as their new team principal for 2025. What do you make then of Audi's hire, this new recruitment thing they've done? And is it another sign of its potential and maybe a sign of Red Bull's demise? I'll start with you, Ronald, on this one.
Well, to be fully honest with you, I basically saw it coming already since Miami, because I remember in Miami I had some off-the-record chats with people within Red Bull, and it was quite clear that Jonathan Wheatley was looking around for options to become team principal somewhere. The only reason I didn't write it, because we all didn't know where he would go, so that's some news from the summer break. But I think maybe he still had some hopes to become team principal at Red Bull at the beginning of the year, when the investigation with Christian Horner was still ongoing, and in a lot of media reports it was all said if he will step down, then maybe Jonathan Wheatley is the guy to step in for him. As we all know, Christian Horner didn't step down and is not planning to do so. So then it's quite natural and quite normal, I would say, that he started to look elsewhere for options to become team principal, and there are not many options to become team principal in Formula One. And if so, it's also the question, what project, and do you want to be involved in that? I mean, Alpine is a good example of it. They have a new team principal as well, of course, with Oliver Oakes, the high-tech man. But there are a lot of question marks around that project. The same can be said about Audi, of course. A lot of question marks with maybe the Volkswagen group being directly involved, which is not always the smartest thing to do. I think they should take a look at Mercedes. What they did really well is just let the Formula One team do its thing without too much involvement from top management, and that seems to be lacking at the Audi project a little bit. But anyway, it will be dual management with Matteo Binotto and Jonathan Wheatley. As far as we understand now is that Matteo Binotto will oversee the technical departments both in Hinwil and in Neuburg under Donau, and the coordination between the two, and look at the bigger picture. And then Jonathan Wheatley is the team principal on a daily basis. So it's basically his dream job and what he already wanted for a long time. So I think I saw it coming. I also think Red Bull saw it coming. And if we talk about Red Bull, of course, it's the second senior figure that's leaving the team. It's also the second guy that has been around for a long time, pretty much since the beginning of the team. So that's quite significant. Still, Red Bull is not looking for a big signing, a big external replacement, as we understand so far. It's basically what they did with the technical team also. When I had a chat with Pierre Wache, the technical director, he said after Adrian Newey left, basically the roles within the technical team didn't change at all. The only thing that we are missing now is his input, his feedback, and someone looking over the shoulder and saying, okay, did you think about this, or did you think about that? Which we should not underestimate, because being challenged is quite an important thing within a Formula One team. But also when it comes to Wheatley, I think they will go for the same approach with some reshuffling, with promoting some people from within, and that's how Red Bull at least will try to deal with it. Whether that's successful or not, we can only judge in 2025.
The significant thing there that's kind of different from the way Alpine's done it for over recent revolving door management changes is that the Wheatley becoming a team principal is very much someone who, even though he's moving teams, he's kind of been promoted from within. He's not someone like Laurent Rossi at Alpine who's come in with just an MBA or two to their name and thinks they know everything. Jonathan Wheatley started out as rear jackman at Benetton, so he's done every job on the way up, so he knows how Formula One teams work intimately. He's been at the heart of it for sort of 30 years.
Is it a bit of Red Bull being defiant and saying, we have such strength in depth that we're not recruiting from elsewhere, we're promoting from within somewhere on the line? Because I mean, other teams might look elsewhere and bring people in, but Red Bull seem to be more confident in what they've got behind that can step up.
Well, they're certainly well staffed, and the thing you have to consider nowadays is the budget cap. And there could be, given that Jonathan Wheatley's been the team manager, sporting director for donkey's years now, I think over 15 years, there will be plenty of other people who maybe coveted that role and moved on. There could be other people who are kind of hoping to do it who are there already. And given his calibre as a manager, you would expect that he would have had a succession plan in place, because the hallmark of someone who's an effective manager is that they have a system in place and people in place who can pick things up if they get run over by a bus on their way to the shops.
It always depends which narrative you read or which way you look at the story, isn't it, Codders and Ronald as well? You either have everyone's jumping ship and leaving Red Bull, or the other narrative, you could look at it and say people are leaving Red Bull and Red Bull aren't panicking because they're confident with what they've got already there at their disposal.
Yeah, well, I think, the big test will be 2026 anyway, the new regulation. I think I anticipated this year to be much easier. Basically, I thought this will be quite an easy double championship year for Red Bull. Maybe 2025, the same story, and then 2026 will be the real test. Now the competition is already much closer than what I anticipated in Bahrain, whenever everyone was saying, okay, just play the national anthem 24 times and we move on. So the landscape is already different, but I think for Red Bull as a whole, as a racing team, the 2026 overhaul in regulations will be a massive test. You shouldn't forget that they lose Honda, that they will have their own powertrains project. They have the massive overhaul on the chassis side without Adrian Newey. We shouldn't forget that Newey, every time the regulations changed, his part of the job was always quite good. In 2029, they were there second half of the season. 2014, they were lacking a lot on the engine side, but the car itself was not too bad, which you could see on high downforce circuits where they were always performing. And then you saw the same again in 2022. So this will be the first huge overhaul in regulations without Adrian Newey being involved. Then you got all the question marks on the engine side. Then on the sporting side of the team, you have people like Jonathan Wheatley leaving. So I think, for now, for the rest of this season, they should be fine. Maybe for 2025, they should at least be competitive. But huge question marks for 2026.
Should be fine for the driver's title. Maybe not so fine for the constructors.
Exactly.
That's the big issue. But we're not gonna start bringing that one out right now. I'm sure we'll talk about that on Tuesday after Zandvoort when we do the episode there and talk on the rise or not so of Mr. Perez. But let's park that one for now. Now, another story that's come out recently is a chat that our very own John Noble had with Stefano Domenicali. They had an exclusive sit-down chat for Autosport.com, and in that chat, there was this conversation of having reverse grids in the sprint races and Domenicali defending that position, saying essentially, we should do something. Do you think this is the right step? Is it too radical to bring in reverse grids, Codders?
Well, given that sprint races are a gimmick anyway, why not? I've always viewed them as statistically anomalous. To introduce reverse grids like F2 does it. It sometimes works in F2. It sometimes just means the guy who came 8th the day before leads a parade of cars the day after. And what does it achieve there? Fundamentally, it's not addressing the problem, which is that the current generation of cars are too heavy. The way they generate their downforce means they have to be stiffly suspended, so they can't ride curbs. That gives them fewer choices of angles around corners, and as we've seen this year, it very much mitigates against overtaking opportunities unless you're very, very finely tuned on DRS, and that shortening the DRS zones sometimes doesn't work, as we saw in Spa. Max Verstappen saying, well, I got stuck in a DRS train. You actually had to pick me up off the floor when I heard him say that. So this is a sticking plaster on top of a sticking plaster. And so what I would say to Stefano Domenicali is knock yourself out. If you wanted to stick plasters on top of plasters, busy yourself doing that. But also, given that you're the highly paid CEO, busy yourself with bettering the technical formula and chipping away at the actual problems rather than just, papering over the cracks, to use a different metaphor.
Before we come to Ronald's answer on that one, I just want to highlight that to the person watching or listening to this, they won't have a clue that we just had a technical issue just there, because while you were talking, you froze, but the upload will come through absolutely clean. So your sentence finished, Domenicali should knock himself out. and that's where it ended for us. And it picked back up again. But it was a weird way to end it. So to our listener and our viewer, they'll have no idea that that's all that myself and Ronald just heard for a little while just there. But we picked up the rest of it there when you came in with a different analogy.
It's a good thing I didn't have a John Inverdale spectacles moment then, isn't it? Because that would have been worth an edit.
Ronald, what about yourself then? What are your thoughts on reverse grids? And should Stefano knock himself out?
I was about to say, apart from that quite special quote, I fully agree with everything Codders just said, because I think it is a sticking plaster, and the real issues are much bigger, and they get bigger and bigger again. If you look at the effect of dirty air this year compared to last year, it's getting more of a problem. The only thing I have with the sprint format, how it is now, I feel that it's a huge spoiler for things to come on Sunday. What I always like, both as a fan but also from a working perspective, is analyzing the long runs after Friday practice. Then teams can still change the setup going into qualifying. And then going into Sunday, there are still some unknowns and some question marks. So who's going to be good on tyres, who won't be good on tyres. And basically, with the sprint format you have now, with the quickest cars up front, it's a huge spoiler for the main race, because you already get the full picture of the race pace over a full stint. So I think that's a bit disappointing. But then to make it even more disappointing, to make it even more artificial by going for the reverse grid, I'm not sure if that's the solution. My solution would be to improve the technical formula indeed, and to get rid of the sprint format altogether. Also, if you compare it with the junior series, I think there it makes sense, because there's a different purpose in doing the reverse grid. It kind of develops some skill for the drivers, because the quickest guys have to go back, and then they have some overtaking to do. But I mean, that's part of their education, their road to Formula One. But once you're in Formula One, it's not part of your education anymore. Or it shouldn't be part of your education, at least. So I think it's a good thing for the junior series. But yeah, for F1, I'm not completely happy with the way it's organized now. I wouldn't be happy with a reverse grid. So I would say also if you look at the workload for the mechanics, because now with double park Ferme, it's a huge workload every single weekend. So I would say just if you really care about the people, and they always say they do, but if you really care about them, then you have to show some actions and basically get rid of the sprint format altogether. And
the question is, with these sticking plaster solutions, which then don't work, so they do something else, you can get it to absurd extremes. If memory serves, didn't the British Touring Car Championship have a live televised drawing of the grid positions as balls from a bag? Like that, almost like a magician.
It was a Perspex bowl. It was a Perspex bowl, Codders. Come on. It was a Perspex bowl. It was a fish bowl.
The drivers could actually see which thing they were picking, which was ridiculous. So why not? Why not have do you remember the days when the National Lottery numbers were drawn live on TV and there'd be like some big pizzazz? If you're going to be ridiculous about it, just be that ridiculous. Go have a live draw. Have one of these celebrity non-entities that I don't know that's there. After they've dissed Martin Brundle on the grid, get them to draw a few balls out of a Perspex goldfish bowl. Why not? Hey, the influencers will love it.
Have 20 celebrity/influencers. The driver of each car stands behind their one of choice, done by championship order on the Friday. They select their celebrity. Then they have a fairground punching machine, the one that gives you a score. And each celebrity steps forward and punches that thing, and their score's registered. And the highest, that's the qualifying order for the sprint race.
Yeah, you can laugh, but that's coming up in the next F1 commission.
Yeah.
Oh dear, yeah, probably yes.
Yeah, exactly. Coming up to a Grand Prix near us soon. I have got one radical idea, by the way, and this isn't part of our podcast, but it's going to go in there, I'm sure. One radical idea for a sprint Grand Prix, a sprint race, and then the Grand Prix is get rid of qualifying for the sprint race entirely. Get rid of all of that. Give them an extra testing session and do reverse grid based on championship order for the sprint race, and the result of that sprint race sets the grid for the Grand Prix.
Yeah, we're getting into number one territory.
Both of you jumped on that one. They're like, angry. No one's answering it. This is going down to the keyboard warriors now. We're leaving that one for the key. Just on that, do you have any radical ideas? Any thoughts that would work, Codders?
I'm going to let this, apart from resolving it via a game of Ghostman's Knock or Blind Man's Buff or Pin the Tail on the Donkey or whatever, I'll leave that for the people below the line to lay out their thoughts. After you've smashed the like button, write your ideas down, and I'll be back in a week.
Smash that like button, smash it.
Yeah.
Ronald?
No, same for me. And honestly, in the landscape we are now with Formula One and with Liberty Media, I feel that a normal Grand Prix weekend is the most radical idea you can come up with. So I'll stick with that.
That is radical. We'll never take off that one. Never take off. Bring back the bizarre concept of the fishbowl and the numbers. Right, now let's talk about that. There's a Grand Prix coming up. Should we talk about that?
Yeah.
All right, let's go.
Do it.
Because that was an unequivocal.
We've wasted the viewers' time for long enough. Let's get on to the meat of it, shall we?
Yeah. It was an unequivocal silence that I really liked. Now then, so there is a Grand Prix on its way. Zandvoort, the Dutch Grand Prix, if you didn't know. Now, let's talk some teams. Let's start with Mercedes, and that's Andrew Chauvelin. He's been very open, hasn't he, really, about Mercedes, their recent form, saying that, and I'm going to do quotes here, the potential for the W15 was always there, but they're still wary of issues of managing the temperature of their tyres, aren't they? That's 3 wins they've had in the last 4 Grand Prix. Are Mercedes rapidly becoming the team to beat? Stuart.
Potential is a very dangerous word in Formula One. I remember David Coulthard saying to me once, I hate it whenever any other driver or engineer says, oh, it's got potential. I kind of go, because he remembers when he was at McLaren and they got Alain Prost to test the 2 versions of the car with different wheelbase lengths. And Alain Prost said, oh, that version's got more potential. And it sucked and they had to do the other thing. So whenever anyone says potential, you kind of think, has it really? In this case, maybe the potential was there and it was just a case of unlocking it through setup. That seems to be how they've progressed through the past few Grand Prix. You could argue that Austria was a happy accident because of the Norris and Verstappen incident. But in other races, Silverstone, Spa, very, very strong. Was that track specific? Also, possibly yes. Fast circuits. The car was able to ride low. They weren't too bumpy. Will that picture change at Zandvoort? Maybe, maybe not. They brought a new floor that they had to take off or revert back, as an ex-colleague once ungrammatically opined. So the question is, was it a case of understanding? Are they going to try it again and see how they go from there? There's still quite a few unknowns there, I think.
But their unknowns is always the thing. But as a team, they do seem to have grabbed something by the something and have turned a corner. There's a lot of.
It's always good to grab something by the something in Formula One, I think. And,
and turn corners. I always think as well.
Well, if you grab the steering wheel, it's a good thing if you want to turn a corner.
That is true.
Have done a great job of from being completely uncompetitive a couple of years ago to building. And when you look at the development trajectory of the likes of Mercedes, who've kind of stuttered all the way through and they've had difficulty adapting to the ground effect, they've had difficulty simulating the underfloor. You look at how McLaren have done. Also, there are some red lights there because McLaren have said, well, actually, some of our upgrades have worked better than we expected. And any engineer will tell you that bad correlation is bad correlation. So if you're not understanding why something's happening, you're kind of in trouble. In McLaren's case, I'm sure it's a trouble they're quite happy to be in because they've got a quick car at the moment. But you look elsewhere at people who are bringing developments to the car and they're in all sorts of trouble. Ferrari, Red Bull, a lot of the midfield teams, all sort of having difficulty with adapting to this phase of the regulations where, as I think, was it Adrian Newey or James Allison who said that development was becoming more asymptotic as the kind of diminishing returns set in as we move through the generations. And so I think quite a lot of teams will be very pleased that Ronald will be attending this Grand Prix because Ronald is basically kind of like the Typhoid Mary of Formula One. Wherever he chooses to stand at a circuit during practice, someone will have a kind of significant but not actually injurious shunt. It's such that the car has to be taken away on a crane. And Ronald is our point man for taking a picture of the under tray. So it's this point of the season. Everyone wants to see what everyone else's underfloor looks like. And Ronald's going to be there, kind of like the sirens of Greek myth at whatever corner he stands at. It'd be, point your car at me, don't turn the corner, point your car at me. And then we'll be seeing what's happening under some of the new developments.
I heard a rumour, and it might be a rumour that I'm just making up, that wherever Ronald is, there's a bag of thumbtacks that he's just dropped over a wall somewhere. That's not the case, by the way. For the record, I'm sure it's not a bag. It's more probably a tub, isn't it? It wouldn't be a bag because that'd be an accident waiting to happen for yourself. Codders has opened it. Go on. You want to come back? Go on, Ronald. Just defend your corner.
I just want to thank all of you if they will take my accreditation away in Zandvoort. So thanks a lot for that.
They will never do that. You're bulletproof. You're bulletproof.
No, but I mean, this year the magic has gone a little bit, to be honest, because last year it was crazy. Every time I went trackside, a crash happened, and the best part of it is that it was always a new floor. I remember I was in Monaco. Mercedes introduced a new floor. Lewis Hamilton crashed right in front of me, and I got the picture of the underside. Then Red Bull got an updated floor in Hungary. I had a chat with a Dutch photographer, and I said, what's the best place to go to? And he said, well, you take the shuttle and you jump out. So I did. I was literally standing there for 30 seconds, and Checo went off right in front of me. Again, got the picture of the new Red Bull floor. But this year the magic has gone a little bit. It only happened in Suzuka in Japan, where Logan Sargent, unsurprisingly, had a crash right in front of me, but I'm not sure if too many people were interested in the Williams floor. But anyway, the magic is a bit... Yeah,
and the cap stayed firmly on the front of the camera there, didn't it? You didn't even bother to release it. That's very mean. That's very mean. Just on this upgrades issue, and we will talk about McLaren in a second, but Cod has brought the topic up, so let's stay with upgrades, because there's been quite a few stories, hasn't there, recently, Ronald, about different teams talking about their upgrade and upgrade strategy. RB have been talking about it. Alpine have been talking about it. Williams have been talking about it as well for 2024 and for 2025, and this being the basis of their 2025 cars. What can you tell us about that? And this was also actually just staying on McLaren, on Mercedes very quickly. It's refreshing and nice to hear Andrew Shovlin being so open and honest, again, inverted commas, about their problems and what they've overcome. Just stick to the upgrades though, Ronald, for us for a bit. What's been going on in the upgrade world?
Yeah, I mean, in the upgrade world, it will be crucial months coming up, really, because as you pointed out, rightly so, this will be the baseline for most of the 2025 cars, and especially for the teams struggling so far. You mentioned the RB team, but the same goes for Ferrari. They have been struggling. We talked about it in a previous video, that they found some gains in the virtual world, so in the simulator and in the wind tunnel. They brought it to the circuit, and then they found some unintended consequences, mostly the bouncing at Ferrari. So for all those teams, it's crucial that they get it right with the next bunch of upgrades. First of all, because the wind tunnel time is limited. Secondly, because the budget is limited. But most of all, because 2026 is already on the horizon. And that means that most of the upgrades in the second half of the year will be the baseline for 2025. And that in 2025, the focus will mostly shift towards 2026. So basically, whatever you bring to the car in the next couple of months has to be right, because it's basically the basis for one and a half F1 season. So it's like crucial weeks coming up in that regard. If we talk about timing, one of the teams that needs something is obviously Red Bull. They had the package in Hungary. They still say the package worked, but just the step was not as big as we anticipated it to be. So they need more, but Helmut Marko already said, like last week during the summer break, he said the big solution, if they need a big solution, but the big solution will not come at Zandvoort, of course, also related to the shutdown. So they need a bit more time. But yeah, as you pointed out, like Williams, Alpine, RB, we can all expect significant packages in the upcoming weeks. And for all of them, it's pretty much crucial. So that's something to look forward to for sure.
What sort of upgrades are you both expecting to see from these teams, from all the teams really, as we move towards this back end of the season? Codders?
Well, they mainly seem to be focusing on floor updates, because that's where the majority of the downforce is generated still on modern F1 cars. You saw with Mercedes that they tried to play some clever tricks with the front wing to make the underfloor work harder, and actually that brought in some more unanticipated consequences. So it's a question of refining that underfloor, and the main challenge with getting it right is that part of the budgetary restrictions is that the wind tunnels, basically the speed at which you can run the fan is capped, and that's been the source of all the bouncing problems pretty much since the ground effect regulations came in, because the porpoising and the bouncing effect only set in at speeds higher than could be simulated in the wind tunnel because of this cap on basically the blowing speeds. So either the FIA agrees to allow them to turn the fan up a little bit, or we'll see a little bit more of this, of teams doing a few floor changes and then actually seeing whether it works, whether it doesn't, and sometimes moving back to a previous design. And of course, it's very sophisticated, because it's not just a case of putting one bit on a car and that bit unlocks, 0.3 or half a tenth or a whole second. It's the way the entire aerodynamic system works together. So it's the bit ahead of the floor that channels the air up and over the car and under. It's the way that the diffuser expels the air once it's gone through. It's the way the rear wing ejects it, and all of those things have to work together. So although we've principally been seeing new developments in the underfloor, the bit that we can't really see, we do occasionally see little bits and bobs around the edges as they just sort of tune it so they can get the most out of the underfloor.
We only see the underfloor when Ronald's around with his camera, it seems. Just on the cost cap then, and we'll move on to another topic in a second, but Codders, on the point of the cost cap there, is it ridiculous then that there's a cost cap in place, and one of the most expensive parts of all this is using wind tunnels expensive, but generating the actual components, taking it to the track and running it on the track, that's got significant impact. So if they allowed the wind tunnel to be turned up to allow the design to be the most effective as possible, surely that's the biggest money saver out there.
I'm surprised there hasn't been a discussion about it, but maybe, just maybe, there are some people sitting on older wind tunnels where it might not necessarily work, and also there'd be a bit of an infrastructure spend. It's not like that fan you might have by your treadmill at home or your watt bike or whatever, where you can just press the extra button and it blows a bit faster if you're mafting, as we say up north, in the summer. There's an expense and probably a capital expense involved in making that happen. So there's never an easy solution to these things. We've kind of gone down a path and we are where we are. And if you just try to start applying a bit of counter steer to it doesn't really work, because you have the unintended consequences. And Formula One is utterly full of unanticipated consequences, isn't it? So you tweak one little dial, it changes a whole load of other stuff, and then you're always having to apply course corrections. So sometimes it's better just to accept that you have a direction of travel and move in it, and then when the next change comes, try and proactively come up with a strategy to not get stuck with these problems again.
I bought an aircon unit for my house because it was so hot last year, and that thing produces air at such a high rate it could skin an apple just when you turn the power up. So maybe I could go to Alpine, Williams, and the rest of it and say, hey, I'll sell you my aircon unit. Right, move on to that was a bit of a digression. Here's another story then. Zak Brown spoke exclusively to Autosport. I'm going to look at my notes here as well. There are notes, by the way, for this. Look at my notes to see exactly what he said. But he said he doesn't have a number 2 driver in his team, believes both Lando Norris and Piastri can coexist in a title fight. Here's what he said. He said, again, in inverted commas, they race for the team. They're the types of individuals I think can race each other hard and be number 1 in their own mind and respect the fact that we run 2 number 1 cars, as we always have and always will. Tough words there from Zak Brown. Do you agree with Zak, or should McLaren potentially, again, be favouring one driver over the other, Ronald?
Well, I think first of all, it's what we all want to see, what all F1 fans want to see. If we go back to Spa, I was quite happy that Mercedes let them race. I mean, Lewis Hamilton was catching George Russell. Maybe a lot of people were anticipating a team order because Lewis was on much better tyres, but thankfully they didn't want to decide the race from the pit wall. In the end, it got decided by a different factor. But anyway, I think I was quite happy to see to let them race, and the same goes for McLaren. So I'm quite happy for them to be this open about it and just to have 2 number 1s basically. And let's be honest, if you look at the championship order, then Lando Norris is ahead. But would you make Oscar Piastri a number 2 driver? I think he's way, way, way too good for that, and he has way too much, I know Codling loves it, too much potential for it. So yeah, definitely Oscar is not a number 2 driver. So you also have to look at the championship standings. Of course, you can look back at Hungary and say Lando Norris lost some points there. But if you look at the championship standings, Max Verstappen is still 78 points ahead with 10 races to go. I think if he will not have too much bad luck, if he will not have too many DNFs, then he should be able to get it over the line anyway. And then McLaren main focus has to be on the Constructors' Championship, and I think they are actually the favourite to win it. So I think as long as they don't do anything silly, if they don't lose points for the team, which they haven't done so far, I think then it's perfectly fine to have 2 number 1 drivers, and especially coming back to the first point, because Oscar Piastri, if you look at the trajectory and the development he's on as a racing driver, I think it would be extremely unfair to make him the number 2. Also, Lando Norris has missed some opportunities himself to make the gap bigger. I mean, the starts have been not always as good as he wants them to be recently, so I think Lando missed some opportunities. Oscar is definitely on the up, even with a broken rib. But anyway, I think therefore it fully makes sense to stick to basically 2 number 1 drivers. And again, it's everything we want to see as Formula One fans, so I'm quite happy with it.
Stuart, I'll come to you and McLaren in just a second, but it is interesting when you talk about Max in this championship that what might be aiding Max in the championship is that there are so many protagonists behind. There are so many different drivers all vying for wins, second places, third places, that they're kind of taking points away from each other. And if they all ganged up on Max and said, go on Lando, off your pop, or go on Charles, off your pop, go and get seconds and firsts, and we'll let you win the title that way, the driver's title. But of course it doesn't work that way. But it is probably falling into Max's hands. There's so many drivers, fighting at the sharp end, as we sometimes say in commentary. I'm never sure what that means, but the sharp end. God, let's just talk about McLaren then, because they've really improved their low and medium speed cornering. Red Bull have admitted that's where they're struggling. So does that make, sticking with McLaren and with Lando and with Oscar, does that make McLaren the favourites for Zandvoort?
Yeah, quite possibly. And the fact that these two drivers can actually work together and both of them have a certain level of competence. It's not like so you would say with Red Bull, where at some point, and I remember the moment very clearly in the Silverstone press room when one of my colleagues said, well, Perez will just have a shunt in a minute and bring out a red flag. And literally, it happened. And it seemed to happen every Hungary as well. I was sort of I was at home for that one, and I said to my wife, who said, "Oh, how long's this rubbish on for?" And I said, "I did a lot longer than it's scheduled because Perez is going to shunt in a minute." And lo and behold, bing, into the barriers, red flag. Mrs. Codling, dischuffed, disgruntled, toddled off. So you have drivers who have share a level of competence. They work together well at the moment. I think the thing with Piastri is he's not just good, he's exceedingly low temperature as well. Bryn, your air conditioning unit at its lowest temperature wouldn't knock a bit of skin off him. He's just so cool. And if he ever fulminates, he's got the good sense to not have his thumb on the radio button while he's doing it, and he just lets his driving do the talking. We did see in Hungary a few little bits where he sort of wobbled, kicks off a bit of gravel, had a few moments, so he'll want to eliminate those. But I think the thing with Piastri is he's very quietly putting his craft together. He's confident, he knows he's good, and he's waiting for his moment where he can make his case to be allowed to keep a win or whatever and not have to obey team orders. And I think he's the sort of person who probably won't negotiate. He'll just lay out the facts. This is how it's going to be. And I'm with Ronald on this one. I'm all for drivers being allowed to race one another, and I'm sure teams are as well, so long as they're not kind of like in the old days of Williams, where 1986 Mansell and Piquet took points out of each other and Prost waltz in at the end. That's not a scenario any team wants. So what McLaren needs now is both drivers to not leave points on the table, because we're getting to, as we say, the sharp end, as we say, not in commentary, the sharp end of the championship, though the opportunities to score diminish. And that's when you look back at the season and go, oh, well, if we'd allowed Norris to do this then, etc., we needed those 5 or 6 points just to get us over that line. That's you don't want to be in the situation where you're regretting decisions you made earlier in the season, I think, is the way of looking at it.
Yeah, McLaren, Zach Brown's right. The McLaren seem to have a decent... They've managed those drivers very, very well. We know that Lando's basically Zach Brown's son, don't we? The way he behaves around him. But they've managed them both very, very well.
Are we in the Jeremy Kyle show all of a sudden? Do we have to do a DNA test?
We're not doing a DNA test on that one. No, nobody wants that. No, but they've managed that team very, very, very well. And even when Lando was being grumpy on the radio, shall we say, and saying that he was ignoring all the radio messages, and then getting a bit grumpy about the team order, he did come out subsequently and say, it was I took Piastri's moment from him, and that wasn't good. So he's getting a bit more mature in his understanding, and I think as a relationship for a driver, it must be a nice relationship to manage for McLaren. Tyres. Let's go from sticky situations to sticky situations. Oh, that was nice. Tyres. They're going for... Genius! It makes itself up.
You're going to get an award for that at the end of the year.
I am,
sure.
Aren't I? Yeah, but it'll be a wooden spoon award, won't it? Now, Pirelli have gone for the hardest range, the C1s to the C3s. Their last representative race, that was in 2022, and it was a two-stop strategy. Ronald, are we expecting to see the same this time round?
If it's dry, it's always an important disclaimer in the Netherlands, but if it's dry, then probably yes, because the weather in the Netherlands is as unpredictable as it is in the UK, so... You're talking about the British summer, but I think the Dutch summer is not great either. But anyway, I think Pirelli is always a bit conservative, maybe a bit scared if it comes to Zandvoort. They are always a bit scared for the load that the tires get in the corners with the banking, in the Hugenholzbocht and the Arie Luijendijk bocht, so the final one. So yeah, then probably a 2-stop can be likely. Good to know for that is that they have created 6 new pit boxes in Zandvoort for this year. And basically the request for that came in after the first year, so after 2021. A couple of drivers, including Carlos Sainz, they said it was a bit too narrow, like the gaps between the teams and their pit stop places, they were not big enough. So then they created 6 new ones. The funny thing about it is that the FIA went to the Zandvoort organization and they said, well, if we get a race with some rain and some chaos in pit lane, then it might become dangerous. The funny thing is that we had it last year, that after lap 1 and lap 2, it was complete chaos with the rain coming down, and there were no dangerous situations at all. So maybe it wasn't as bad as the FIA anticipated it to be. But anyway, they created 6 new pit boxes, which is quite funny. I was there a couple of months ago when Jack Doohan did his test in an Alpine 2022 car. And I was looking for those new pit boxes. So I was walking through pit lane, and towards the end I saw a new building with only glass walls, and then I walked back. And I asked some people, like, where are the new pit boxes? And they told me, yeah, you just walk past it because they are behind the glass walls. But they didn't look like pit boxes, but that's because they will only be used as a pit box during the F1 weekend, and the rest of the year they will be like meeting rooms or whatever they are needed for. So that's a thing to look out for. But the thing I'm looking out for the most in Zandvoort basically relates to what we were talking about before, which is the dirty air. Because when we went to Zandvoort, and it also affects the strategy, but when we went to Zandvoort, we basically anticipated it to be like Monaco, with no overtaking at all. I have to say, with the banking and with DRS in the final corner, overtaking was much better than expected. Last year in the rain, of course, it was okay. When it was drying out again, 2022, it was still okay. But this year, dirty air and following is becoming much more of a problem again. So I'm really curious to find out if there will be any overtaking in Zandvoort, and if not, then you have to take it into account with your strategy, because then it will be like Hungary, where you have to prefer track position over maybe a tire advantage. So that's something for teams to keep an eye on. And also it will make qualifying even more important. And qualifying, I think, will be extremely exciting in Zandvoort, because just like the Hungaroring, it's a relatively short lap. We have a field bunching up, so I'm really, really looking forward to Saturday afternoon, to be honest.
Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. It's nice that we're looking forward to a Grand Prix again, isn't it? It's been a while. It's been too many weeks off, I suppose, although maybe both of you are quite happy you had a few weeks off. But 10 races to go, kicking back off this back end of the season at Zandvoort. Bryn's wild prediction, random prediction question. We'll get that on a hashtag, I'm sure, at some point. Codders, this is the first time for you that you've been faced with one of these. I'll come to you first. So, a random question from me. Zandvoort, which team is going to score the most points?
Oh, good question. I'm going to... Am I allowed a random answer?
Go as you want. Go as you want, yeah.
I'm going to go slightly off-piste. I'll say Mercedes, just to be different. But it'll probably be McLaren. But just in case I get first prize... do that. Do we do prizes? Is it like Glengarry, Glen Ross? You know, first prize is a car, second prize is a set of steak knives, third prize is you're fired. I'd much rather have first or second prize.
Well, I've got a few bits of leftover Lego when I made this, so you can have the leftover Lego if you get it right.
That's an injury hazard if you stand on it.
Ronald, what do you reckon?
Well, I really want the Lego, so then I'll play it safe and go for McLaren.
Just to be clear, it's not that Lego, it's the leftovers. It's the kind of extra bits. But you're saying McLaren, are you?
Yeah, I mean, with the salary I've got, I will take anything I can get. So it's
fine. Very good. So you're saying McLaren is the team that will score the most points. Codders is picking 2 teams, one being Mercedes, the other being McLaren. So he's covering all bases just there. I'm going to say Alpine, because I always get it wrong. Gents, thank you very much indeed. We shall catch up with you again soon. Thanks a lot. Well, there you go. That just about does it for our preview for the Dutch Grand Prix. Let us know in the comments your thoughts. Go wild. There's plenty to get through. Let us know who's going to win, who's going to come second, which team are going to score the most points. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up to date with all of the content. And we'll be across the entire coverage of the Dutch Grand Prix, so make sure you stay tuned. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.